Let's get into some white history. White history, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, we're going to do some white history today. This is an article that came out in the Time magazine, and I will post this link in the description box as usual. These are 10 U.S. bases named for Confederate officers. So it's not just the statues that were named after Confederate officers. There are also military bases in the U.S. named after Confederates. And I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, after reading about each one of these generals, it is not shocking that the South lost. These men sucked. They had a whole string of losses. Many of them threw their armies out there with completely unplanned battles. And it is not shocking that the Confederacy fell. There is not one general, and I think one is a colonel, that I'm going to tell you about that was good. They were lousy. Look, they didn't even win the Gullah War in the South. If you can't win the Gullah War, you weren't going to win the Civil War. And that's exactly what happened. But these men were horrible, and nothing on American soil should be named after them. All right. U.S. flag waves over 10 Army bases proudly named for Confederate officers, and they all sucked. Some of these men were so bad, ladies and gentlemen, they had to be replaced. They did so poorly with their armies. That's how bad they were. And this is what America named their bases after: a bunch of men that sucked. It's tough to top the historical amnesia that has let the Confederate flag fly over the South Carolina Capitol for more than half a century. But the U.S. Army certainly can give Columbia's banner a run for its money. It operates posts named for 9 Confederate generals and a colonel, including the head of its army, a reputed Georgia chief of the Ku Klux Klan, and the commander whose troops fired the first shots of the Civil War. It shouldn't be surprising. Both the Army and the South are tradition bound entities that revere their past. I don't know what they're revering because these men sucked. And when we go through each one, you'll see what I mean. Each of the posts were named for a Confederate officer long after the Civil War, including many in the first half of the 20th century, when the U.S. military was rushing to open training posts for both world wars. Army Colonel Steve Warren, a Pentagon spokesman, said Wednesday there is no decision underway about renaming the post. The Army itself stood firm. Every Army installation is named for a soldier who holds a place in our military history, Brigadier General Malcolm Frost, the service top spokesman said Wednesday. Accordingly, these historic names represent individuals, not causes or ideologies. It should be noted that the naming occurred in the spirit of reconciliation, not division. No, the naming occurred because there were Dixiecrats in Congress that named these posts, and Congress voted and went along with it. Okay, that's what occurred. What makes all this especially bizarre is that the Army has always been the service with the most African American troops. More than one of every 5 soldier is black, double the Marines' enlisted share. Every day, thousands of them salute smartly and prepare to defend the nation on soil honoring their race's oppressors. And the thing is, black men and women in the military have never been honored like the white soldiers, period. Okay? You are fighting for a country that never appreciated you in the first place. Okay? Many people, even when I was over in Germany living there, told me the best soldiers in the military are the black soldiers. Number one, they did everything faster. Number two, they they said just when they went through training, the black soldiers always excelled. Always, because physically we just always have excelled. Not only that, we're smart people too. It just gets downplayed in this very oppressive society just to make sure a certain group stay at the top. But believe me, they're not the smartest and brightest. They're not. And this is why America is sinking right now. Because, see, as I told you before in my other video, America is just one big plantation. I don't care where you go, whites are all at the top and everybody else is at the bottom. They run the entire nation like a plantation. And this is why it's sinking, period. And they've done this also in the military. When you look at the military, your highest ranking soldiers and everything are white. And black people have been in the military for many years and they still can't get promoted like the white soldiers do. That's a fact. Okay, it's a fact. But let's look at the chart here. And as you can see, under African Black or African American Army, 13.3% of the officers are black and 22.8% of the soldiers in the military are African American or black. The Navy, 8% of the officers in the Navy are black. 18.9% of the enlisted are black. The Marine Corps, 5.4%, and 11.1% are enlisted. In the Air Force, 5.9% of the officers are black and 16.2% of the enlisted are black. All right. And then you have the Asians, the Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, Native American, which are much smaller in the military than the black people are that's in there. I wish it wasn't like that, but unfortunately, it is. Okay, don't blame us, the Army seems to say, while the service traditionally solicited possible names from within its ranks. Unsolicited suggestions for names were also submitted from sources outside the military establishment, and political pressure and public opinion often influenced the naming decision. The Army says in its history of naming Army installations, as a result, it's common for camps or forts to be named after local feature or veterans with a regional connection. In the southern states, they were frequently named after celebrated Confederate soldiers. I don't know why these men were celebrated, because when you read about each one of them, they sucked. No kidding. All 10 of the bases located in the Confederacy, stretching from Virginia to Texas, and some of the honored officers, frankly, don't appear to deserve celebration. Amen. I say none of them do, because every last one of them, like I said, had a whole string of losses. Some had to be replaced. Some of them were hotheads and all emotional. And these men sucked. Camp Beauregard, Louisiana, honors Louisiana native and Confederate General Pierre Gustave Towton Beauregard, 1818 to 1893, West Point class of 1837. They went all the way to West Point and still went back home and sucked. It is a major training site for the Louisiana National Guard. Beauregard was the first brigadier general in the Confederate Army, dispatched to defend Charleston, South Carolina. His troops began shelling Fort Sumter on April 12th, 1861, launching the Civil War, and then had a whole string of losses. Fort Benning, Georgia, honors Brigadier General Henry Benning, 1814 to 1875, a Georgia lawyer, politician, judge, and supporter of slavery. The Army established Camp Benning, known as the home of the infantry, in 1918. It became a fort 4 years later in 1950. Forts generally are larger and more permanent installations than camps. In the wake of Lincoln's election, Benning became one of Georgia's most vocal proponents of secession, according to the New Georgia Encyclopedia. So, in other words, he was a traitor. On November 19th, 1860, he delivered a speech before the state legislation urging immediate secession, ending the speech saying, "Let's do our duty." And what is our duty? That's why you lost, because you got a dummy right here in charge. I say, men of Georgia, let us lift up our voices and shout ho for independence. What? Okay. Let us follow the example of our ancestors and prove ourselves worthy sons of worthy sires. And then he lost. All right, moving on. Fort Bragg, North Carolina, honors General Braxton Bragg, 1817 to 1876, West Point class of 1837. He waged war proddingly with frontal assaults and a lack of post-battle follow-through that turned battlefield successes into battlefield disappointment. So in other words, he sucked. He took his army out there totally unprepared. That's what they're just trying to say it in a nice way. Even Bragg's staunchest supporters admonish him for his quick temper, general irritability, and tendency to wound innocent men with barbs uh, thrown during his frequent fits of anger. So he would get angry and take his anger and frustrations out on innocent people. In other words, he was a hothead. Um, all right, so his reluctance to praise. All right, so there were a lot of people that did not like this man. That's what they're saying. Um, Even Bragg's staunchest supporters admonished him, and I read that, and um, his reluctance to praise or flatter was exceeded, we are told, only by the tenacity with which one formed he clung to an adverse impression of a subordinate. For such officers, there were many in the army of Mississippi. Bragg removal and their transfer were only alternative to unbearable existence. Boy, this was very poorly written. I don't know who wrote this. This was horrible. And so, anyway, what it's saying is this man was so terrible in the army, he had to be removed. All right, like I said, you want to name a military base after a hothead that lost, put his army in unprepared situations, didn't plan nothing out well, took them out on the battlefield, lost, And this is who you named a military base after. Bragg. He sucked. Okay. Fort Gordon honors Lieutenant General John Brown Gordon, 1832 to 1904. One of Lee's most trusted officers. The post began as Camp Gordon in 1917. It became Fort Gordon in 1956. It is home to the Army Signal Corps and the Service Cyber Center of Excellence. Generally acknowledged as the head of the Ku Klux Klan in Georgia, he was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1872, according to the New Georgia Encyclopedia. Gordon denied the charge. By the time of his death in 1904, Gordon had capitalized on his war record to such an extent that he had become, for many Georgians, Southern in general, the living embodiment of the Confederacy. Why? He lost. And you notice how they avoided in that paragraph to tell you about his string of losses, but he had a whole string of losses. And this next Fort A.P. Hill in Virginia honors Virginia native Lieutenant A.P. Hill, who was horrible, another horrible general, 1825 to 1865, West Point class of 1847. The Army created the post 6 months before the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in 1941. Today, it's the training center and maneuver center focused on providing realistic joint and combined Army training. Hill had a frail fatigue, so he was a little frail looking man and was frequently ill. Okay, so they put a little frail, sickly man in charge of an army. That was A.P. Hill. Attributes some historians believe are linked to the gonorrhea he contracted while on furlough from West Point, an infection that forced him to repeat his third year. So he flunked in West Point and had to repeat his third year there. A Union soldier from Pennsylvania shot and killed Hill in Petersburg, Virginia, a week before the end of the Civil War. He probably saw how sick and frail he looked and just took him out of his misery. What's the problem? They put a frail, sickly man with gonorrhea and made him a general of an army. All right, moving on. Oh my God. Fort Hood, Texas, honors native Kentuckian General John Bell Hood. So he wasn't even born in Texas. And he's got Fort Hood named after him. And he's from a whole different state. 1831 to 1879, West Point class of 1853. The post began a Camp Hood in 1942, becoming a fort in 1950. It is the largest active duty armored post in the U.S. military. Hood was wounded in Gettysburg, losing the use of his left arm. Despite that, he led his troops in a massive assault during the Battle of Chickamauga, suffering wounds that led to the loss of his right leg. All right, so you let this general lead with a bad arm, and then eventually he lost his leg. Woo, that man had some bad karma on him. Now, that's some bad karma right there, ladies and gentlemen. All right, Fort Lee, Virginia. This was the one named after General Lee. Honors General Lee, Robert E. Lee, 1807 to 1870, West Point, class of 1829, the South commanding officer by the Civil War's end. The War Department created Camp Lee within weeks of declaration of war on Germany in 1917. So it was World War One when the camp was named for him. The Pentagon promoted it to Fort Lee in 1950, the south of Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. The post is home to the Army Quartermaster School. Lee was the Confederacy most renowned general, and his forces inflicted tens of thousands of casualties on the Union soldiers at Antietam, Gettysburg, and Manassas, and still lost. Moving on, Fort Pickett, Virginia, honors Major General George Pickett, 1825 to 1875. West Point, class of 1846, a Virginia native. Pickett, 1863 charge at Gettysburg has been called the high water mark of the Confederacy before ending up a Union victory. So he started out winning and then started losing to the Union. The charge resulted in a rebel bloodbath. Pickett fled to Canada for a year after the war ended. So he was a coward, fearing execution as a traitor. See, he was a coward. So after the war, he ran into Canada, fearing he was going to be executed, which he should have been for being a coward. He should have been executed. And why is anything named after a coward that ran into Canada at the end of the Civil War? Wow. Camp Pickett was dedicated on July 3rd, 1942 at 3 p.m., 79 years to the day and hour of Pickett's charge in Gettysburg. It became a fort in 1974 and now is a Virginia Army National Guard installation. So they named a fort after a loser. And then at the end of the war, he fled into Canada for fear of being executed. Not only a traitor, but a coward. Wow. Fort Polk, Louisiana, honors Lieutenant General Leonidas Polk, 1806 to 1864, West Point, class of 1827, an Episcopal bishop born in North Carolina, established in 1941. The post is now home to the Army's Joint Readiness Training Center, which trains thousands of soldiers annually for overseas deployments. Polk fought bitterly during the Civil War with his immediate superior, General Braxton Bragg of Fort Bragg fame, before being killed in action in 1864 during the Atlanta campaign. Polk committed one of the biggest blunders of the war. He sent troops to occupy Columbus, Kentucky, which led the Kentucky legislature to appeal to Washington for help, ending the state's brief try of neutrality. Okay, so not only did he fight with his superior, he led his soldiers into complete destruction on a military blunder that he made. Why is anything in this country named after this man? So far, I have not named one man. Woo, these men don't deserve to have nothing named after them. I don't care what they say, ladies and gentlemen. Fort Rucker, Alabama, honors Tennessee native Colonel Edmund Rucker. So he wasn't even born in Alabama. He was born in Tennessee. 1835 to 1924, who was called the general but never obtained the rank. He was known as general after becoming a leading um, Birmingham, Alabama industrialist after the Civil War. So this man had no military training at all, but they gave him the honor of being called general. Huh? This man was not even military trained. Okay, that makes no sense. Okay, so I guess they nicknamed him General, but this man had no military training at all, but he was a current, oh wow, maybe it was nepotism or something. That's crazy. Known today as the home of the Army Aviation, Fort Rucker was originally an Ozark Triangular Division camp before being renamed Camp Rucker in 1942. It became Fort Rucker in 1955. And this man had no military training and he was a general. No, listen to me, Southerners. You lost a war because you put a whole bunch of men in charge that sucked and really had no business being in top positions. They were lousy. And I can't get over the fact that you put A.P. Hill in charge and he was sick and frail with gonorrhea and you still made him a general. That's why you lost the war. What you out in the streets fighting for? Fighting for these leaders? Are you out of your mind? Oh my goodness, these men suck, ladies and gentlemen. That's why they lost that war. Oh my goodness. They sucked. Please leave your comment and subscribe. And if you can donate to my channel, please do. Peace, family.